In this video, I'll show you how to change the press fit bottom bracket of your bicycle. This is something that you'll need to do about every year or two unless you ride in really wet or nasty conditions. Basically, if your bottom bracket starts creaking, it may be time to replace it. To check it, all you really need to do is remove the cranks, which we'll do in this video, and you can put your fingers in the bearings and see how smooth they are. If they're rough, then it's time to change the bottom bracket. Press fit bottom brackets are not that expensive. In fact, you could even say they're disposable. And so really it's just a matter of tapping them out, cleaning the bottom bracket shell, re-greasing a little bit, and then pressing them back in. So let's get started. I'll show you what you need to do this service. Even though this is fairly simple, there are a couple of specific tools you'll need to invest in. So that'll have to be a decision you make depending on how often you think you'll want to do this. Depending on the size of your bottom bracket shell, you'll need a certain size bearing cup remover. So I've got this Park RT1 and Park BBT 09.3. So just different size bearing cup removal tools. The most expensive tool that you'll need is a bearing press. There are some cheap ones out there. This is a nice Park one because I use this quite a bit. But you'll need a bearing press. So those are the specific tools that you'll need. If you have Shimano cranks, you'll need a 5mm Allen wrench and then something to remove that outer cap. If you have SRAM cranks, you'll need probably an 8mm Allen wrench. A torque wrench is always helpful, and then you'll need some grease. As with a lot of repair jobs, a bicycle repair stand like this one makes the job easier but is not required. You don't necessarily have to remove the rear wheel. You can if you want to, but you do want to disengage the clutch. So in a Shimano, you just push that forward. If you're using a SRAM rear derailleur, just rock the cage forward, hold in the little lock button, and release the cage until it catches. I'm just going to push the cage of the rear derailleur forward. If you have a SRAM, it's already going to be locked forward. And then I'm just going to take the chain off the front chain ring and just rest it on the bottom bracket shell and let the cage of the rear derailleur go up easily. So in this video, I'm really not going to show you how to remove Shimano cranks. I'll link a video below of how to do that. But it's really just a matter of undoing the pinch bolts and then undoing the top cap, taking off the left side and then pulling out the drive side. To remove SRAM cranks, you're going to have probably a 10mm Allen bolt on either the drive or the non-drive side. And it's just a matter of putting that in and taking it off. And then to reinstall, it's just the opposite. There are no pinch bolts or anything like that. It is pretty tight, so it's going to be pretty snug. It's 54 Newton meters, so when you reinstall, make sure you tighten that back to 54 Newton meters. And so that would be quite a bit of effort to take that off, so just be aware of that. All right, now with the cranks removed, I'm just going to lay the chain aside to get it out of the way. With the cranks removed, put your fingers in there and just turn the bearings. So this bike is about 2 years old and the bottom bracket has never been changed. And so the right side's a little crunchy and this bike's been creaking a lot. So I know it's time to get these bearings out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap out each side one at a time. So I'm going to use my removal tool. I'm going to feed it in and then it'll click. And then you can take your hammer and just tap these out. So that's what your bearing cup looks like. So this bike, it was a lot easier to tap out the right side first. So it's going to depend on your bottom bracket, but I would start with your right side. So this is the sleeve. Now that I have this out, I can put in a bigger bearing removal tool. I couldn't do that with the cup end, so that way I can easily tap out that left side that's being a little stubborn. There we go. Got both sides out now. So with the bottom bracket removed, put some rubbing alcohol on a paper towel or a rag and really wipe out any sand, dirt. You might even have a little bit of moisture in there. Just really clean the bottom bracket shell. We've got the bottom bracket shell nice and clean. Now it's time to apply a little bit of grease and we'll press in the new bottom bracket. Now it's important if you're using a carbon frame to get some carbon safe grease. This is alloy, so Just going to use some regular bearing grease. I'll just take a little bit of grease on my fingers, smooth around on the inside of the bottom bracket shell on both sides. All right, so I've got my bottom bracket, and this one retails for $30. The price tag's still in the box. Usually a bottom bracket will have an L and an R, so I'll press in this one first, and then I'll press in the other side. So I'll just get it started with my hand, just push it in, and then we'll use the bearing press. And you always want to press in one side at a time. So I'll take my bearing press, put it through, and just tighten it down. And then you want to make sure it's going in straight. Usually if you have the bearing press flush against each side, you'll know it's going in straight. Once you feel it grab, you just want to snug it a little bit. Make sure there is no gap. So looking between the bottom bracket cup and the shell, there is no gap. So you just want to have this be snug. You do not want to over tighten that. Just have it be snug. Now I'll press in the other side. So I've got my bearing pressed through, and I'm just going to press in the other side. Again, really pay attention when it first starts going in and make sure it's straight. Just like the one side we did, make sure it's snug, make sure there is no gap, but do not over tighten that. Before you reinstall your cranks, make sure you wipe off the excess grease around the bottom bracket shell. You don't want that to be a dirt magnet. Time to reinstall the cranks. I'm going to lay the chain up here just to make it easier to put back on. And you want to put a little bit of grease on the spindle of your crank. Got a little too much there, so just wipe off the excess. All right, so push in the crank. And depending on your crank, some of them push in from the other side, so the spindle is attached to the left side of the crank. Tap that all the way in, and that went in with my hand. There are times when I have to use a rubber mallet just to tap that and make it flush, but that one went in well. I'll go ahead and put the chain on. And remember, if it's a narrow wide chain ring, which most are today, one link is narrow and one is wide, as are the teeth. One's narrow, one's wide, so make sure you line that up. And I'll put the left side crank arm on. I told you I wasn't going to really go into Shimano cranks of how to remove and install, but I will say, if you're new to this, make sure you install this cap first, tighten it down snugly with a little tool, and then do your pinch bolts. That just has to be snug. It's the pinch bolts that really hold the crank arm on. And don't ever try to ride without that. And if you are using Shimano and not SRAM, the pinch bolts are tightened really evenly, and Shimano says about 12 to 14 Newton meters. One last thing that I'll mention is when you have the cranks off, it's always a good idea to just clean areas of your suspension linkage or frame and even the chain rings that are harder to get to with the crank set on. All right, so that's how you tap out and press back in a brand new bottom bracket. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it will depend on the conditions that you ride in. It could be anywhere from 6 months up to 2 years. I wouldn't go more than 2 years without replacing that bottom bracket. And they're only about 30 bucks. So any questions or comments that you have about this procedure, about this video, drop those below. Thanks for watching. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press in this one first.